Heinrich Fraenkel spent over 18 months in research traveling in Germany, meeting people who had known Goering in his public and in his private life. He found Goering's widow, Frau Emmy Goering, still convinced of his greatness and of his devotion to Germany, and still resenting bitterly the way in which he was finally treated by Hitler. However, from the men who had to associate with him in public life, Fraenkel gained a more critical account of Goering's opportunism. Men such as Franz von Papen, for instance, or Hjalmar Schacht, senior officers and aides of Goering in the Luftwaffe, notably Karl Bodenschatz, Erhard Milch, Adolf Galland, and Bernd von Brauchitsch, gave Fraenkel another picture, that of the commander who became more ruthless and arbitrary with his subordinates as he became more abject in the face of Hitler's obsessions. That Goering grew inordinately afraid of Hitler during the last years of the war is now certain, just as it is evident that he retired as much as he possibly could from the devastation and disappointments of a losing struggle in order to enjoy the remaining fruits of luxury and indulge his preoccupation with the arts and the treasures he had gathered at Hall, the mansion that became the symbol of his pride and success, and was, in its form and structure, as eccentric as William Randolph Hearst's San Simeon. Still, the explanation of Goering's strange mixture of charm and ferocity, devotion and ruthlessness, physical courage and moral cowardice, urge for power and abjectness before Hitler, remained to be found. Was his ill health, the glandular trouble that caused his excessive weight, a cause of his inconsistencies? Fraenkel studied the details of his personal habits with the men who had in one way or another tended him, and in particular with Robert Kropp, his valet from 1933 until his imprisonment in Mondorf in 1945. Then, late in the period of research, a chance remark let out in conversation revealed the truth about Goering's drug addiction, resolving all the rumors current in Germany during his lifetime. The addiction that Goering first acquired in 1923, when morphine was prescribed to ease the pain from the poisoned wounds he sustained during the unsuccessful putsch in Munich, was never finally cured. Like certain other flyers in the First World War, he came under the care and observation of the celebrated Professor Kalle of Cologne, a specialist in drug addiction. This fact was confirmed by the staff of the Kalle Sanatorium, which Fraenkel visited, and where he was given details of the drastic cure which Kalle administered periodically whenever the toxic elements had to be removed from Goering's system. Among the symptoms of morphine addiction described by the Kalle Institute were great excitement of the nervous system, excessive activity of certain glands, outpourings of vital energy, and abnormal vanity. This went a long way toward explaining the extremes of behavior so often described by those who knew Goering. At the same time, I met in Stockholm one of the specialists who observed Goering during the worst period of his addiction in 1925, when his violence made him dangerous and his confinement in Longbro Sanitarium became necessary. He assured me that Goering's mental capacities were quite unimpaired, that his derangement was caused entirely by the excessive quantity of morphine he could no longer prevent himself from taking. Our contacts then led us back to several men and women who had known Goering as a child, the most important of whom were Fräulein Erna and Fräulein Fanny Graf, and the eminent physicist Professor Hans Thüring, who gave us the account of the significant relationship between Goering's mother and his Jewish godfather, the Ritter von Eppenstein, as a result of which he was for many years brought up in the castle of Feldenstein, where the Goering family were invited to live so long as they enjoyed this arbitrary and unpleasant man's favor. Goering always referred to this castle as if it had belonged to his father, but Heinrich Ernst Goering in fact lived there only on sufferance, and in the end the family were turned out by Eppenstein and went to live in Munich in comparative poverty. Later, Goering was not only to inherit Feldenstein from Eppenstein's widow, but to own a mansion that far outshone in splendor the provincial grandeurs of his youth. These and certain other facts began to make the unique character of Goering more credible. The violence of his motives and the extravagance and opportunism of his behavior could now be understood more clearly. The excesses of his vanity were at any rate to some extent the product of his bodily condition. But even his enemies were prepared to allow his ability as a negotiator, and the late Lord Burkitt, whom we consulted about Goering's behavior at Nuremberg, noted at the time of the trial how Goering had from the start managed to dominate the proceedings. "No one," wrote Lord Burkitt in his private notes,